Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, coming on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. And a few weeks ago, I was sitting outside 191 Tool here in Arizona and doing an interview with a dear friend and comrade Frank Lacrasto in 115-degree heat before his performance with the Fruit Bats. And in the middle of our interview, he mentioned that he was playing, or he had played with my next guest, and I just was sort of blown away because I actually didn't realize that my guest was still not only with us, but performing at a prolific pace, and I was delighted to be able to connect with him. So much of my show has revolved around rhythm, and rhythm is love, and at the end of the day, my guest has been a part of so many contingents that exude love on the bandstand, whether it's Bill Evans or Art Landing, Gary Peacock, Stan Getz, and many of these people were far from perfect human beings, but when they got on the bandstand, they healed sentient beings and people all over the world. And my guest still has that rhythm and love inside of him, and I look forward to breaking it down with him. Eliot Zigmund, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
It's an honor to have you, man. You know, I just wanted to play you this Name That Voice. I don't expect you to know who this is, but just pay attention to the content, and we'll come back and break it down.
Okay.
Yes. Be a character, a player. You understand?
I did.
But I think that basically the answer to your question, the way to make it work, is that it's not what I know and do. It's what the persons and peoples that I'm playing with at the time and the moment. What I know that they know that I know that they know. What works,
right?
Like
right.
The way 3 or 4 watercolor painters will agree on a certain way to use a blue and green. I think it has to do with who you with, and then this process of changing it up in layers that you speak of, that then it works really beautiful.
I'm sorry, I should have prefaced that with my question, Eliot. That was my first interview with Johnny Vidakovich. Have you ever hung with Johnny before?
Johnny who?
Johnny Vidakovich.
No, I never heard that name before, actually.
Johnny V is one of the legendary drummers of New Orleans, played with... anyway, he's from your generation, and I asked him about Tommy Coster from Santana. Talked to me about in '65, listening to the Plug Nickel sessions with Tony and Ron, and that was the first time that he heard them playing standard tunes, and then when they would leave the head of the tune, they would start breaking up time and form. And it was very scintillating because up to that point, people were just kind of playing through standards and things like that. And, they'd play My Funny Valentine, leave the head, and go off for 20 minutes. And I kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about your evolution on how you learned to break up time and form.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Well, I mean, first of all, thinking back to it, it came very naturally to me. It was kind of in the air at that point from stuff that was explored in Bill's earlier trios, but also I was a big fan of Jack DeJohnette back then, and also the way he had played with Bill on that Montreux album, and I even got to hear him play live with Bill once, and I really loved the way he played, and a lot of his approach was going against kind of, bebop and post-bebop orthodoxy, and just in terms, I remember Dave Liebman saying once, so I used to hang out at this loft every once in a while, play sessions with him. That Tony was a great drummer, but he was playing basically eighth notes and triplets, whereas Jack was more playing the air or just sounds, or the eighth notes and triplets were secondary to just his concept of sound. And it's true in a way. Tony was a wonderful, wonderful virtuoso, but his stuff basically could be defined or annotated rhythmically pretty easily, where that would be harder to do with early Jack. I'm not sure exactly what's going on now, but I know whatever he's doing, he's given his whole heart to it.
Can you talk about the Montreux? I mean, I'm sorry, the when you saw Jack play live with Bill, what was that experience like? Because I mean, Jack was he was a great piano player. I mean, he was very melodic to begin with, and so I mean that must have been, what year was that you see them?
Oh God! I mean, I don't even know. I'm very bad with.
It's okay. Kind of it's okay. The point. Can you talk a little bit about the conversation?
He didn't stay with Bill very long. He got a call from Miles, and I think he was with Bill for 6 months. So it must have been at the Vanguard, and it must have been sort of around the time of that record, whatever that was. I don't quite remember. Do you?
Well, the Vanguard, the 61, but that might maybe early, a little bit later than that. But I guess maybe that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about, was this. I've been really getting on this trip, just being a younger cat, this idea of bebop orthodoxy, and then versus what cats were trying to do to increase the vocabulary of the music. When did you sort of, I mean, you weren't necessarily a professional when that stuff was, where were you at when that stuff was percolating in that mid-'60s period?
I guess I was late high school, college. I ended up taking a bachelor's degree in music, and I had very little knowledge of classical music at that point. I was basically a guy that was playing the drums. I loved jazz, but I didn't necessarily think I'd become a jazz player per se. So I was an avid listener at that point. I mean, to all kinds of things. I was trying to learn about classical music, and I developed a great love for that. And I was listening, I mean, back then it was easy to kind of keep up with stuff because, artists like Miles or Monk, I mean, they'd make 1 or 2 records a year, and there weren't thousands of CDs coming out a day. Right. And the community was sort of smaller, and everybody knew everybody. And also the music, the fact that bebop and post-bebop was so strong in New York. It was just it was the center, and everything would leave from that center or would depart from that center, but also was very, very related to that center, as opposed to now where these tributaries are very established and they all have experts that are in that field. Back then it was much more of a generalized, jazz musicians to earn a living were real generalists, so they could play in the studio, they could play early funk, early rock and roll. So I was just aware of it as a student, and I wanted to add, in addition to Jack, Paul's playing implied a lot of that. I mean,
beautiful, yeah.
He was one of the first guys that made that happen in a trio setting, and certainly Scott LaFaro must have influenced Paul, because he was a great broken player too, one of the first guys that played that way. And I mean, a lot of what the drummers ended up doing was in complement to what the bass players were doing. And I would say the revolution happened on the bass before it happened on the drums. These guys were playing that way from Scott on, and that was kind of earlier than Tony and Jack and what was going on with drums. So I think it was just in the air. Also, I had the great fortune of growing up in New York, so these guys were accessible to me, not just on records, but I could actually go and hear them for incredibly small amounts of money.
It's so freaking cool, man. I cannot believe you. My dad and you were born the same year, and he was born in Queens, and was not nearly as avid a fan, but he would wind up at the Vanguard, and Miles would sit down at the table and just be smoking a cigarette. I mean, my dad was too intimidated to talk to him, but it was like there were no entourage.
As was I.
Yeah, right. And it's like, Can you talk about these natural tributaries that existed? I think it's really fascinating because today everything is so specialized across the board, not just in music, but in everything. And in some ways, to me, it's sort of stunted the ability for music to grow. I'm not saying that you didn't use the word jazz, but were these was it really kind of like, looking back on it, was it the Duke Ellington school at that time that it was all music and then the subjective part was that it was good or bad?
I'm not sure what you're asking me. Kind of. Can you
I guess what
repeat
I'm
it in
saying is,
different words?
like, you have cats that, specialize, you were talking before about how sort of it was this innocent, almost general sort of musical palette that was out there. And, and today you have all these different, I guess it's two different questions, but the idea is that labels, how much were labels involved with the music at that time?
Not a lot because, take an example of the bossa nova thing, that Stan introduced to jazz in a way. I mean, they were all, kind of welcomed as add-ons, but none of them would threaten the dominance of learning how to play bebop, the necessity of learning how to play bebop. Chord changes, the time feel, what the drummers were doing, what the bass players were doing. That was all still part and parcel. Today, interestingly enough, I was just listening to the local radio station. Sometimes I'm doing the dishes or cooking dinner. I turn on WBGO,
Sure,
which is the big jazz station in this part of town. And, I'm amazed when I hear the drummers today because even the jazz guys, the young jazz guys, are much more influenced by funk than they are by Elvin Jones or by Philly Joe Jones, even to take it back a little further, or they are by Tony Williams even. These guys sound and tune and play like funk drummers. I mean, and I respect the hell out of them because I run into some of these guys playing fusion and funk, and the shit they're doing, I'm sorry to use that word.
It's okay.
The stuff they're doing on their drum set is absolutely virtuosic. I would never even dream of attempting any of it, especially what they do with their bass drum feats. So in that sense, I have great respect for them. But there's very little link to what came before, and I'm not sure if that's a thought out equation, like cats really just don't want to play that way. They want to sound super modern and, the way they tune and the way they hit. Or that's just what happens as music evolves. I don't know. But certainly the distance from that core of bebop that I grew up with has grown very, very, very long, very far away. And a lot of cats, unless they're really students of the music, which I guess they tend to be more if they take a degree in music at this point. A lot of cats don't seem to be really involved in that tradition.
I want to go deep. This is so important. I'm just curious. Is it? I'm not a drummer by any means, but is it as simple as saying that the lost art of feathering the bass drum is no longer there? Like, what is it about funk drumming that is so far removed from Philly Joe? I mean, when you listen to Philly Joe, all those guys, they were all feathering the bass drum. So to me, that seems to be somewhat of a lost art. But I just want you to, as Eliot Zigmund, to talk about that.
I think that, I hear you. The whole emphasis of jazz drumming back then was that the ride cymbal was basically the center of the drum set. The ride cymbal and being able to play light on the bass drum and to play along with the quarter note on the bass drum. In other words, most jazz drummers, good jazz drummers, want to provide that little soft bottom with the bass drum that hooks up with the bass player playing 4/4.
Totally.
So most cats, when they learn to play the ride beat with the right hand and the other hand on the snare drum, but they also learn to play the hi-hat in 2 and 4 and to play the bass drum very softly in 4. And that was kind of the way I grew up. I honestly I don't think funk drummers do that anymore. They don't play the beat with their foot. They use the bass drum for rather strong accents most of the time. But, again, I would venture to say that these guys are such virtuosos, they wouldn't have trouble feathering the bass drum. I just don't think and some of them might do it even. They might play the bass drum in four. It's just a whole different emphasis. So what I started out saying was, in jazz, the ride cymbal at that point tended to be the center, and everything would come off that ride beat around the rest of the drum set. Today, the bass drum and the closed hi-hat and the backbeat on the snare drum, those are kind of the centers, especially the counterpoint between the bass drum and the snare drum. And that just wasn't, so the whole emphasis of what the drummer's trying to do has gone from playing great swing time on the cymbal, using the rest of the drum set to augment that. And, you get a chance to solo on every second or third or fifth or seventh tune, depending on who the band leader was and what type of music it was. But basically, it was an accompanying instrument. But I must add this, it was also seen more often than not as the center of the band. I mean, there's this saying, if you have a jazz band and you have a crappy drummer, that band's not going to sound good. It's just never going to get beyond a certain point. And a lot of those cats, they saw the drummer as the center of the band, the center certainly of the rhythm section that people played off. Today, it's different. I mean, today, a lot of people might feel the bass player is the center because the basses are amplified up the kazoo. And if you notice, if you buy jazz records, you'll very, very, very rarely hear stick definition on the cymbal. You might hear a little snare drum, some bass drum accents, but generally, I mean, my hearing is not what it used to be with high frequency. But generally, I can never hear the cymbal on these records.
You're nailing. I am so sorry. Go continue, please. This is unbelievable.
I mean, back in the 50s and 60s, I could identify Roy Haynes, Philly Joe Jones, Max Roach, Charlie Persip by their ride beats, man. Not by their soloing. I could hear Philly Joe Jones. That's Joe. I mean, I know it's him. And Elvin. I mean, how could you not miss Elvin's ride beat? And it just doesn't exist today. It's a whole different world. And, a lot of these cats, as good as they are, maybe the young guys can differentiate between them. But, they're all so involved in that kind of pyrotechnic virtuosity. I can't tell one from the other. I have no idea who's playing most of the time. Not to speak of everybody else. I mean, there's so many thousands of people pursuing this career these days. I don't know. And it brings me back to a time in my life with Bill when I would tell him new people on the scene that he never heard of. And I feel like I'm kind of like in his shoes now. I mean,
No, you're not, dude.
I can't follow these guys. There's just too many guys out there. It's incredible, and women. Not just guys.
You would say that because I would argue that, well, like you just said, you could tell all those cats from their ride cymbal, from that, you could tell who they were. Everybody had their own individual sound. I mean. They worked on that sound. That was like I said, that was the center of the drum set. You had to have a good swinging, identifiable beat. Absolutely, and that's all I listen to is records. So like you can really, you listen to Pete LaRocca with Jackie Byard, and it's just like, it's just ridiculous. And now, Eliot, I can't tell. I don't care how virtuosic someone is. I struggle figuring out who anybody is anymore in some ways. Modern, there's a homogenization of sound. And I just wonder how you think or why everything was so individualistic at one time in bebop language versus now in modern melodic improvisation or jazz. I can't tell who anybody is, whether it's a horn player or a drummer. Like why is there just this emphasis on comping, even if they're trying to be virtuosic, versus just playing yourself?
A lot of these young guys think they are just playing themselves. Mm-hmm. And truth be told, they probably are. Yeah. This is the way the music has evolved. So if somebody jumps in at this point, they're going to be, drawing on the influences that are around them. And, when I was growing up in New York, when I started playing, I wasn't going back to listen to Zutty Singleton or Gene Cooper. I was listening to Philly. Philly Joe was my idol, and he was an idol for a whole generation of players in New York. He was the hippest thing that was going, man. And, cats just, it's just the circumstance of the music. And like you say, everybody has become a specialist. So this guy's is going to play with the ECM guys. This guy is going to play with whatever still exists of the hard bop, the guys, or the hard post bop guys. And this guy is going to play Broadway shows. And this, it's also a demand of the marketplace more than anything. If I wanted to get a Broadway show at this point, it would probably take me the rest of my life and then some to even be able to talk to a contractor. Where when I was, 25 years old, I could have probably stepped into one of those gigs very easily. I never did because I was left-handed, which made me a real pariah because I actually had to turn the drums around.
Well, I'm a lefty too. We're always pariahs. Yeah. So you turn.
It's really a scene with a Broadway show with the room in the pit is very, very tight. So if you're going to come in and do a sub, which is the only way you get into that world by subbing, they're going to look at you and throw you out. You're going to turn the drums around. What are you, crazy? So.
All right, so let's just get down to this because, can you talk about – the other thing I wanted to ask you about is if you could talk about the earliest time in your professional – when did you turn professional? And I think the other thing that I'm also fascinated by is the utter lack of dynamics in modern music, not necessarily in jazz. Even in pop music, they turn it up to 10 and it never leaves 10.
Right.
And so can you just talk about, I know that reputably, Swallow was talking about you being out in Berkeley and things like that, but 65, I'm venturing when was your first gig and what gig gave you, where did your ears grow the most on the bandstand?
Where did I grow the most?
No, where did your ears grow the most?
Say it again.
Yeah, so the gig, the earliest gig where your ears grew the most on the bandstand, because you didn't have you were playing, in some cases you were playing out of public address systems. They weren't these state of the art stereo systems that people have today, where you really had to listen. You had not everything was mic'd. And I kind of wanted you to talk about where you thought your ears grew the most early on in your career.
I think right from the beginning, because I've always seen myself as an accompanist, and I've always seen myself as a person that has to, being an accompanist, I have to really listen closely to what's going on around me and use whatever tools I have, which were fairly primitive at first, to push that soloist out in front of the bandstand, to complement what he's trying to do, not to lay myself on top of him, but to actually get under him and push him up, push him out, do whatever I can to make his solo sound the best. And that was early on. I'm 77. I started playing professionally at 15. So I've been playing professionally for 62 years. Given, certainly the early gigs were more commercial oriented, but you got to remember back then, rock and roll was just in its infancy. So if you went on a dance gig, or you went and played a wedding or a bar mitzvah or something, most of what you were playing at that point was still jazz oriented. It still had a swing feel. It's only, in later years, once the 60s, got into the 70s and 80s, that every commercial thing became funk. I loved commercial music growing up. When I remember walking around in my house when I was 7, 8 years old, singing these hit parade songs, watching the hit parade on TV with my parents. Those were great songs, man. There's nothing that rivals that in pop music today. That's the real crime. People are missing the beauty of melodic harmonic music. It's terrible. So, right from the beginning I was listening, and right from the beginning I was playing jazz. The other thing about growing up in New York is the only city in the world, and I can say this pretty authoritatively because I've traveled all over the States and all over the world many times. Nobody plays sessions the way cats do in New York.
Let's talk about that. Well, explain the mentality of that. I love that. And you're not talking about Okay, I mean, I just interviewed Will Lee. His first gig to get into the studio was with Kentucky Fried Chicken jingle. But you're talking about jazz session.
I'm
Session.
talking about you call three cats over to your house and you play for 3 hours.
Oh, I love it. Jesus, I love
And
it.
that's really where you learn to play. I mean, the reason these bebop cats sounded so great in the 40s and 50s was they were out playing 5, 6 nights a week, 40 weeks a year.
Absolutely.
Nobody does that anymore. When I left for a tour with Bill Evans, we'd go out for 6, 8 weeks. By the time you're in your second week, the music is completely conversational. You're not even thinking about the physicality about what it takes to make it. You're just interacting. It's like talking to to me talking to you or talking to my wife. And that's what made these guys so strong and what made the music so strong. You go back and hear these records today, they're astounding. I mean, that's part of it. Right from the beginning, I was listening and I was approaching it as a jazz player because that was the dominant music of the time.
15 years old. You were a member of the Union at that time.
I was a member of the Union probably 2 or 3 years later, but the Union was very powerful and useful, and required union reps would come to the gigs, and if you didn't have a union card, somebody would get in trouble. Maybe not you, but the band leader or the catering place or whatever. These guys would always show up and check a union card. So at a pretty young age, I joined the union, and
Were those
it
the
was
sort of, I'm just trying to get a feel for the Eliot Zigmund 1960-61 gigs. I mean, because that was, to me, like Motion was playing Sufi music with Bill Evans at that time. Like that. What I'm saying is like that was, and you were just a teenager, but I'm like, where was Zigmund gigging at? What were you doing?
yeah, just commercial gigs.
What does that
mostly
mean though? Like
gigs.
top 40 or like dances?
Well, there was no top 40 then. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There was like, let's play Dancing in the Dark. Is
Right.
that top 40?
I love
Okay,
this,
it is.
dude.
But it's a beautiful tune,
Totally.
So I was surrounded by beautiful music as soon as I started playing. Also, my older brother, who's still with us, was an aspiring jazz guitarist at that point in his life. So we would play together pretty much every night. I became a drummer because I felt that would be the easiest way to be able to join him. So my parents got me a snare drum and a hi-hat, not a full drum set with 6,000 drums and 4,000 cymbals. It took me 3 or 4 years. I started when I was about 11 to actually acquire a full drum set. That's the way things were back then. So with a snare drum and a hi-hat, you're going to learn pretty well how to play brushes because there's no ride cymbal to play. So I became a facile brush player right from the beginning, and then I got a bass drum and a ride cymbal. Wow.
Oh, big time. So who, like, can you talk about, you approached these gigs as a jazz, with jazz aesthetics as a jazz drummer. Do you remember the first time you ran into when you found yourself on the bandstand with your elders?
Oh yeah, the other big training ground for me was the Catskill Mountains, which
Okay, so you're just blowing my mind because that's where the stand-up comedy, but there's also a lot of jazz in between.
I met hundreds of musicians there, some of which, I met Marty Morell there, this drummer Alan Schwartzberg.
Oh, dude, Alan's like a surrogate uncle. I cannot believe you met those cats up there.
What'd you say, Alan's your uncle?
He's like a surrogate uncle to me.
Oh, okay.
He's a dear
That's
friend. He's a
interesting.
dear friend, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I knew Alan pretty well back then. We played opposite each other in all these hotels. Sometimes you'd be in one band in a hotel, and somebody be in the other
I
band. or
love
they'd be
this,
they'd be in a
dude.
band
Oh,
a couple of
my
miles.
Yeah.
And there was lots of sessioning going on. That was really more of a training ground and an important factor for me than the gigs I did in and around New York, because you'd go up there and you'd spend 2 or 3 months in the mountains, and you'd be surrounded by other guys that were basically aspiring to do what you did. And like I said, jazz was the language that you needed to learn. So everybody was some kind of a jazz musician, for better or worse. And I met some incredible people there. Bobby Priscelli, Alan Rubin was up there. I played a whole summer with Eddie Daniels, who was not playing saxophone; he was playing trombone in the show band.
Wow.
He had this reputation already as a saxophone player, and I guess he wanted to go away with his wife and spend the summer in the Catskills, so he got a gig as a trombone player in the show band. So he was on the scene. I used to play sessions with him after the gigs ended, clarinet, bass, and drums. We played trio sessions all summer. And then I got to the point, once I graduated college, I started spending full years up there. So I'd be up there in the winter too. And that's when I kind of bonded with Marty. I think we were both at this hotel called the Homowack Lodge, and he was in this trio and I was in the show band, and that's sort of the time that he got with Bill, I think, or shortly thereafter. And I really looked up to him. He was one of my idols when I was a kid, because he was a couple of years more advanced than me, a real professional, and he sounded great. And so I got to know him. So that was very, very important. And again, I would say at that point in my life, that training ground was even more important than what I was doing in New York. But there was no shortage of work in New York. I was playing a lot right from the beginning. I was the first member of my family to own a car.
Wow. And you could actually get around in New York at that time.
Yeah, I had to get something to take my drums to gigs with, So it was fascinating, And
Do you think that in the Catskills you learned, I don't want to say repertoire, but did you develop a big bag of tunes, or did you, at that time? I think I'm just wondering, like, how you developed. When you say training ground specifically, what I'm getting at is just like you went to the academy, man school music, and
I didn't learn anything about jazz in school.
Exactly, and
in fact, you couldn't even talk about jazz on the threat of being,
expelled. Right? Yeah, no. Eddie Henderson at Howard, the security guard held a gun to his head to get him out of the practice room. He said, "Don't play that devil's music." It's unbelievable. I mean, freaking Roberta Flack was going to Howard. She wasn't playing jazz; they were playing chamber music.
Right.
So. When you say training ground, can we just break down what that meant for you in terms of becoming somebody who could be a first call, drummer, not just in the studios, but on the bandstand?
Well, I mean, one of the things I did up there a lot was play shows. So show playing is, kind of a close cousin of being a big band drummer.
Mm-hmm.
You need to read everything. You need to know how to make fills to prepare an accent for the band. There's just a lot of skills that cross over into being useful in other areas. And then you play in a lounge band. There were some great unknown, virtually unknown piano players and bass players who would play in those bands, and so I did a bunch of that as well. And so between those two things, and again, the majority of the music, especially when I was in the Catskills, because I was really young, this is really pre-rock and roll. I don't remember playing much rock and roll in the Catskills. Everything was jazz-oriented. Everything swung. Everything had, a ding-dick-a-ding beat to it. And you just learned a lot by playing. I mean, the whole trick with jazz is, which is where I feel jazz education really falls short, you got to play jazz, man. You don't have to talk about it. You don't have to study it academically. You need to play it. I mean, these schools would do themselves and their students a great service by eliminating half of the academic BS that they throw at them and let them play. Let them play in the company of guys that are better than them. Let them play with their teachers, and that's what jazz is about. It's a street music, it's not something that should be taught in school, I don't feel. I mean, I did a lot of teaching, and the end result at the end was, this is not the way to teach jazz.
That
is not the way to do jazz.
I mean, it's such an honor to talk with this cat. It's so, there's just a myriad of things going through my head, but like what? Let's just, if somebody said, Eliot, here's a budget. We want you to start a program. What is the stuff that should be taught in the academy? Not the BS. And ultimately, I was thinking, like, should a lot of that money go to opening clubs so that cats can actually play and stop intellectual. I mean, Hampton Hawes used to say to Ndugu Chancellor, like, we've been sitting here for 2 hours. We haven't played a damn note yet. Let's stop intellectualizing the music. Is that even possible in this era of, we're just so loquacious and there's so many words now. Back then, you guys didn't even. Ndugu got on the bandstand with Monk for a 2-week engagement. For the first week, Monk didn't say one word to him.
Right. That's kind of the way Bill was with me. We never rehearsed. He never talked about the music. His assumption was that at this point in his career, if he can't find a drummer that knows what he's doing, by now he's not gonna, he's not gonna hire me. What I would do is make it much more performance centric. It just, whatever it would take to provide. First of all, a place for these guys to play every day, really play hours a day, with some academic, but to concentrate on the playing. And then, like you say, professional spaces, and also let's be honest with each other. A degree in jazz, whether it be a bachelor's or a master's degree, ain't going to do you diddly squat in the real world out there.
That's right.
The only thing it's going to get you is perhaps if you add a PhD to it, is a faculty job somewhere, so you can continue this tradition of intellectualization. And just adding to what you were saying, there's a whole subset of people now working in these schools that don't play at all.
Never have and have no
desire to. And these are the guys that are controlling who's hired, who's fired, what the curriculum is. And these guys aren't even jazz musicians. They're not even musicians. They're intellectuals, which is great if you want to do that. But don't force it on people who are actually trying to be performers. So what I would advise young musicians coming to New York is find a mentor on your instrument, find a mentor for writing, There are experts here in everything you want. Great people. Study privately with them. If you need a degree, get a degree in electronics or computer or become an X-ray tech, which I did for 10 years.
Right.
Learn something where you can actually make money. God forbid you can't make money in music. But don't waste your time getting a degree in jazz, because you'll learn more from 1 or 2 or 3 people in your life than you will from all this crap that they throw at you. And also you'll save yourself, $200,000. I mean, most of these kids that go to school studying jazz, they're from families that can afford to spend that kind of money. I mean, it's incredible what people pay to go to NYU or, it's absolutely incredible, which is one of the places I taught for many years,
Well, I mean, I don't even know how to say this, but did you walk away from the academy because you knew that I often ask this to guys like Billy Childs and other people that are fully ensconced in the academy, is like, how do you authentically teach to these cats when that's not even close to how you were raised in the jazz community? Like, to me, it's almost. Did you just walk away? Did you become disenchanted with the whole process, aside from the fact that maybe your superiors had no credibility because they never were on the bandstand ever?
Well, that wasn't the case with me, because the guys I worked for, Rufus Reed was head of the department when I worked.
Yeah, I mean, these guys are the heavy cats, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was always an administrator who wasn't necessarily a jazz musician, but the guys running the departments were cool. And also at NYU, there were good musicians there. But I walked away from the academy. I was pretty disgusted, but I walked away for financial reasons of my own. I went through a divorce at that period in my life, and I had to, my choice was, I had 2 young children. My choice was to be on the road 6 or 8 months a year, and God knows what I would do with my share of my child's responsibilities, or to find some other alternative way of augmenting my inflow of money besides being a musician. And what I chose to do was, through a day job that I had as kind of a computer guy, word processing guy at a medical school, I found this program in X-ray technology, and I went to school and worked at this day job while I was going to school. And after 3 years, actually, I got my degree in X-ray, and I ended up doing that for, I don't know, all in all, probably about 12 years while I was still playing, while I was still touring, but it was a way for me to be able to be home more and have a basic, livable salary to be able to support my kids and having my own apartment away from my ex-wife and like that. So it was more of a financial decision. And then when I thought about getting back into it later in life, once I was finished with X-Ray and on a more solid ground financially, there were so many guys doing it at that point that it had become incredibly competitive. You need to have degrees up the kazoo, even to be an adjunct.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it was very, very competitive. I mean, probably if I had worked really hard on it, I probably could have got something, but I didn't have great desire to return to it. So fortunately, I was able at that point to start going back and forth to Europe to play with a lot of European people. And jazz is much more respected there and much easier to find work there.
Yeah, there's actually gigs. Yeah, there's gigs.
Yeah, there's actually gigs, and there's respect for people who aren't superstars. And, at that point, the festivals, all the work still played pretty well. Also going to Japan, playing, I used to go to Japan, play with a Japanese bass player for many years with Dick Oates and Peter Madsen. And, so there was opportunity then, and it wasn't as hard as it is now. You could, if you had a bachelor's degree, you could get some kind of a day job if you really desperately needed something. And if you were a musician and played well and had some experience playing different styles, you could usually find work too. One of the things I want to say when you mentioned the Union in New York had a meeting hall every Wednesday, and cats would go there and hang out. And if you weren't working Saturday night or Sunday, the odds are when you left the Union on Wednesday, you would have enough work for the weekend. And my first apartment in Park Slope with my first wife was $185 a month. So if I did 3 gigs a month, I could pay my rent. I mean, think about that.
Well, but that's, yeah, and that's a whole other, man, it's true. It's just like, I mean,
but dig this, man. You go out today, you're still in New York after all is said and done, you're still making, as a jazz musician, maybe 50 to $100 a night. 100 is usually the ceiling for playing jazz in New York, unless you're a big star. That's what I was making back in 1970. So the money has stayed exactly the same. But, it's worth, what, 1/10 of what it was back then, even less probably. And, it's just it's absolutely amazing. I mean, it just shows what the priorities are in this country for artists. It's unbelievable.
I have to ask you, did you ever go to W. Eugene Smith's loft?
W. Eugene?
This was from my interview with Swallow. He said in the early 60s, W. Eugene Smith's loft was a focal point for jam sessions. This was a building where Hall Overton, the composer, had a floor, and rehearsals with the Thelonious Monk Town Hall Band. There were sessions going on all day and all night in loft and several other.
No, that was a little before.
Before your time. Can you talk about? I mean, because I've chronicled the loft scene with Liebman, Chicoria, Dave Holland, Brecker.
Yeah, that's the building I used to.
Oh my God, you lived in that building, or you used to go to?
I didn't live in that building, but I knew Liebman through, and I also ended up playing with Byrack for a long time.
Oh my God, this is just the usual suspects, man.
But Liebman had a loft there. I would occasionally play sessions there. I wasn't one of his, super confidants, but we know each other for a long time. And it's true. Chick had a loft, and Dave Holland had a loft, and Dave had just come to New York to play with Miles.
Sure.
So it was very exciting times. And as much as I was, a student of jazz and I love jazz, I didn't see myself as equal to those guys, or as potential of being them or doing the gigs they did. I still was. I was just completely in awe of these people. And you just tend to minimize what your skills are, and also it was sort of rough and tumble, nobody was taking you by the hand or putting a hand on your shoulder. It was almost a situation where it was every man for himself in a way,
Well, though, I
and
want to talk about that. That's so beautiful you brought that up. There was no, I mean, can you talk about an experience where maybe you fell down on your face, but it was maybe the best thing that ever happened to you because you had to dust yourself off and get back up the next night? I'm not even talking about a jam session, just like a gig, where I think we're so afraid in today's world for our kids to fail, to get hurt. And yet,
right.
in so many ways, my daughter has a swim meet today. Last night, I'm talking her through it. I said, every time I played baseball competitively, I always grew from those adverse situations, even if I was, it was a pressure situation. And yet I've talked to enough cats to know it was, I don't know, every man for himself, but it was hard scrabble. Do you have a memory of sort of, being, falling down but getting back up, and it was the best thing that kind of happened to you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any one specific memory, but that was basically,
A nightly occurrence. No, I'm kidding. Yeah,
that
no.
was basically the scene.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say, you know, it's really, let me just say
Go
it
ahead.
this way, to maybe put it in context. It's really only in the last 4, 5, 6 years that I feel like I've really started to play the way I've wanted to play my whole
Really?
life.
Really?
Yeah, all those years with Bill, I mean, I was always questioning what I was doing, and then after that, I got to play with Michelle Petrociani for 5 years. There was never the feeling that I have now when I sit down, like, man, I'm really in command. This feels great. There was always this questioning or this, slight hesitation, or do I do this now? Do I do that? And then listening to yourself and just not feeling good about it. Oh, Jesus, I got to change that. And why did I do that? And that was always there. And there's something about jazz where you always feel, God, I wish people could hear me now, or, gee, I wish Bill was still alive so I could go back and give him more of what he needed and give him a big hug and tell him I loved him, which I never could do when we were really just with each other. It's as you get older, you get wiser, I guess, but like I said, it's only really later in life. And I'm talking late in life that I started to feel like, I'm really kind of where I've always wanted to be in a way. And it took a hell of a long time to get here. And it's still not perfect. I mean, there'll still be days where I'm a little hesitant, or, I didn't want to play that, or I wanted to play it differently. And so, I would say rather than one incident or two incidents where I fell on my face, I was constantly falling on my face. It was a nightly thing or a weekly thing. And it's happened recently too. I mean, interestingly enough, during the pandemic, I never practiced as much in my whole life that I did in these last 2 years, just practicing things that I never had time or energy or the will to practice when I was a kid, like rudimental stuff on the snare drum, just playing around the drums. A lot of my practice in early years was about, playing the ride beat and swinging and just learning how to accompany really well. I never really, really tried to become a virtuosic technician. Not that I'm a virtuoso at all, but these last couple of years have really done wonders for my technique. And now I just feel a lot more confident. And you just think back to all the things you did and you go, gee, I wish I had that confidence back then. I wish. But also some of the mystery, you lose some of the mystery the better you get. So when I was playing with Bill, it was mysterious, man. Like, wow, listen to this shit.
It's just like water flowing, man. Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't know what's going to come out of you. You're not, I mean, one of the things that happens when you get confident and you get a lot of stuff under your belt is it's not as spontaneous. Then when you don't know what you're doing or your technique is a little marginal, it forces you to go places where you might be afraid to go once you're more skilled, or you might be wise enough not to go there. But then maybe the music's going to suffer. So it's interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, was part of that sort of, I mean, setting aside, I mean, I'm sure you weren't as you didn't have as many years under your belt as you do now, but was part of that sort of creative tension with Bill, just the mere fact that he never talked about the music? Was there even a set list? I mean, he just called stuff out, and especially early when you first joined the band, where you were basically just reacting at that point. That you couldn't even, I mean, you were not in your head. You couldn't be in your head. You'd be behind. You'd fall behind.
I remember the first concert I did with Bill. I played a set with him at the Vanguard. He hired me. I didn't sleep for 48 hours after he hired me. Literally, man. I'm telling you.
I dig, man. I believe it.
That was like, God stepping down and plucking you off the face of the earth,
Totally.
And the first concert we did was a concert in Switzerland, European tour. And the first tune we played was My Romance. And the first soloist on the first tune is the drummer. So he plays the head of My Romance, and then him and Eddie stop, and I got it. Now, I was a decent drummer at that point, but playing on forms, playing, full choruses in the form was challenging, so it was trial by fire and all that. That's what I meant about jazz. Nobody was there like with a hand around your shoulder, nursing you along.
Yeah, you're like, Eliot, you're doing great. You're like,
it was hard ass, man. And somehow I passed the test, but it was hard ass. And I think the thing about me back then was I think people responded to my feel and my touch much more than any technical thing I had. So I think the reason I got the gig with Bill was I just had a good feel because I had worked so hard developing my swing and my ride beat feel. So I'm pretty sure that's what got me in that band, and that's what stayed me well with him.
I mean, I didn't even know this, but we led in with that concert Up With the Lark. From that tune from that Switzerland concert from '75, and that to me, I guess like, how did you know? Did you even know if you were really passing the test at that time, or if he didn't say anything to you after the gig, then you knew you were doing okay, or was there any sort of post-mortems or anything like that, or were you guys just? How did you know where you stood?
Yeah, I don't think it was in question once she hired me.
Sure.
That there were some rotten eggs on that tour, but I think all in all I passed the test, and we went on to do some great music. I really feel that trio was a very, very unique trio, and looking back at it retrospectively, I'm really sorry I didn't stay longer. There was just so much tension from my first wife to get off the road and be there for the kids to help her, and I responded to that. And also back then, it felt like there was opportunity. So if I left Bill, there would be some place to go to. I mean, initially it was Richie Byrack who was putting a lot of pressure on me to leave Bill and play with his trio. And finally I did. And for that reason, but also for the personal reasons with my wife and my kids. And also because with Bill, I think after 2 or 3 years, if you're honest with yourself, you've pretty much done what you wanted to do, because his music at that point was not changing a lot. You know what I mean? It was wonderful. It was incredible to play those arrangements, to hear the introduction to Autumn Leaves, or to play Nardis with him. I mean, but the music wasn't changing, and he was pretty set in his ways. We never got to play with horn players. So there was some things that I was starting to yearn to do, and all these other pressures, and Richie, and thinking, okay, I'm going to leave Bill, and basically I'm going to start playing with Richie, who had contacts and road experience. And I left Bill, and about 6 weeks after I left Bill, Richie decided to join John Abercrombie's band, and that was the end of Richie's trio for a long time. I don't think Richie ever really emerged with a trio. He's certainly done things and made records, but I don't think he's
absolutely.
Really
I just want to go back to something you said. Evans, LaFaro, Motion, Israel's Bunker, Evans, Morel, Gomez, Evans. What makes, in your mind, the trio with you and Eddie and Bill unique?
I think those years with Marty and Eddie, as good as that stuff was,
Right.
it wasn't really. I feel the trio with Eddie and Bill and myself harkened back to the earlier stuff more than the trio with Marty did. That trio became kind of a very straight ahead trio, and I just don't feel it showed Bill in his best life. As much as I respected those cats and I enjoyed listening to them, and I would go whenever they were in town. At that point, I was living in San Francisco actually for a couple of years. So I used to go see them at the Great American Music Hall. Um, I just feel kind of subconsciously my concept of playing was very different and more related to Paul. So I felt I brought back that space, and also I allowed Bill to kind of slow down a little bit. I think he had gotten to the point where he was speeding on a lot of things, so tempers would really increase. And I think there was something about my feel that let him relax a little bit, and the tempos would stay where they started. And there was just more air to the music. There was more space. And again, this feeling of playing broken came very natural to me. It was no mystery to me how to do it. And also, I have no trouble playing very softly. I don't mind playing softly. Again, I always approach being a drummer as being an accompanist. So I'm gonna play what's right for what's happening acoustically, which changes from night to night if you're doing different places. So you might have to play very soft in one venue and then more medium in another venue. So I would always try to respond to whatever's going on acoustically and also in the music. And I just think it brought a freshness to the trio that had become, honestly, and not to speak negatively of anybody, but it become a little stale, I felt. So
That's a really
and
interesting.
a lot of
yeah.
people kind of enforce that when they talk to me. I get emails and Facebook things all the time. Wow, you really were a unique player with Bill. Where did that come from?
It's so fascinating. I mean, Eliot, how what was the, I mean it's I kind of know the answer, but everybody has their own story. Like why? What was your incentive? Being that you grew up in the bastion of New York City, you could go to the Dom, you could go to the Vanguard, you go to Slugs, you could play. There were opportunities and gigs. Why did you? I mean, the first time you came on my radar was when Swallow mentioned you in that milieu of Berkeley and sort of Marin County sort of cats. What was the motivation to go to the Bay Area? Why did you wind up going out there?
Oh, the motivation was as much as I was a jazz musician, I was also a hippie.
I love it. Okay, now we're getting somewhere here. Free love.
And
Yeah.
New York had just become kind of overwhelming. I wanted a change. It started to feel very dark and very super competitive. And again, I didn't have great confidence at that point or great drive, and the temptation to have a life beyond music was strong. That I wanted a more congenial, happy, fun lifestyle. So we just decided to head out. We had a station wagon. We got in and we drove cross country, and we lived for almost 2 years in Sonoma County, cut off completely from professional music business. I mean,
You were up in
I played-
Sonoma County in 70? What was it, 70? Is that right? 70?
yeah, 70.
Holy, what the heck? Why'd you move? What was going on up there? Are you making wine or something?
No, man, we were hippies. We dropped out.
Yeah, but I mean, there were a lot of hippies that were in like Marin, that were a little bit quick, a little bit
Well,
closer
who
to
could
the,
afford to live in Marin?
I mean, even at that time, I guess, yeah, maybe it was, so how did you,
we had certain friends, I guess, that ended up there. So, more my wife's friends. We were just footloose and fancy free. It was just a completely different time. I don't even think people born today can imagine what life felt like back then. There was no career goal. We were
I
just
love this.
looking at-
It's like Ferlinghetti and Ginsberg put together, dude.
Yeah, I mean, very few people were giving any thought. I mean, like today, man, you
Oh, it's
can't do
crazy,
anything
dude. It's
without
so
planning
insane.
30 years in advance, you know.
Jeez.
We were living day to day. I mean, I lived out there without a drum set for several months. I eventually called home and had somebody ship the drum set out. Then then I started playing locally in Sonoma County, mostly with just rock bands. And
Please tell me
then
who did you play with out there? I need to know some of this band, this electric stuff.
I played with this one band called Lamb.
Oh
I
my God,
even
Barbara
forget
Moritz! You played with that band?
what was the
Hey,
name
her
you
name
said?
Barbara Moritz.
No, that wasn't the
That though she
band.
was the head of Lamb. That Tom's.
Maybe it was. Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe it was her. And there
yeah,
was a guitar player, a guy. They were like a duo
yeah.
kind
No,
of.
Tom Salisbury was in that band. That you played in Lamb.
Just for a very
Oh,
brief
that's
period of
so
time.
great, dude. So you got the drum. I can't imagine you being separated from rhythm for that long. I mean, I realize you were you were searching for a little more congenial sort of
Yeah, and we
openness.
had my daughter out there. My first child was born out there, and yeah, really, that was just. I mean, it was kind of one of the things that formed my personality, the way I think, and but like I would say, after several months, I wanted to start getting back into music, so I got the drum set out there. I started practicing again, started playing locally. There were very few people playing jazz out there. And then eventually I said to my wife, we got to move down to the city. I got to start playing again. This is that life. We kind of lived it for what it was, and we got sick of having no money. And so we moved down to San Francisco. And again, rents were incredibly reasonable. We got an apartment right in the middle of San Francisco on Sanchez Street, and I was able to practice there. And I started playing immediately, and I was a big fish in a small pond because I grew up with all this bebop knowledge. And in fact, back then, contrary to what I was in New York or what I learned in New York, bebop was not the center in San
No, no,
Francisco.
it's not. There's a
You
lot of
know, there
skiffle
was
players. Yeah,
there were no center.
yeah.
People were all over the place. It was weird. The Latin cats, the fusion
Oh, it's
cats,
the best freaking.
the
Yeah,
free
no, it
jazz
was
cats.
so not a
I mean,
purist place. Yeah.
it was all over the place, man. So as a bebop drummer, I was pretty much in demand as soon as I got there. I
Wow.
started playing with Mike Knock. I started playing with Steve Swallow. Ron McClure was out there. I played a
Sure.
lot with him. I met Art Landy. We had a really solid performing thing for a couple of years.
What
And
was the Where was the
friends.
venue for this stuff? Where was the the Stone Jam? I mean, Jack's on Sutter was a late night jam. But where was like
There were
the?
all kinds of places in Berkeley. We used to play at this place called the Steppenwolf, and there were always little gigs, little clubs and little concerts in Berkeley and also in San Francisco. I mean, I remember playing at Basin Street West. I
Wow.
remember playing, and I also hooked up with Vince Guaraldi out there. So I played 2 years with him and a bass player called Seward McCain, who
Oh
got me
my
on the
God, dude! I
gig.
cannot believe you're dropping Seward McCain's name, dude. This
You
is
know Seward McCain?
well, no, I just know. I mean, I have chronicled this time. So it's a Pierce Street Annex. Were you hip to like? Did you cross paths with like Denny Zeitlin and those cats when you were out there?
I never crossed paths with Denny Zeitlin, unfortunately. He used
You kind of remind me
no,
of you guys similar vibe, but you never played at the Trident in Sausalito or things like that.
say again.
You didn't play at the Trident in Sausalito.
I might have played at the Trident a couple of times, but not with Denny or
Now, yeah, well,
you know.
no, of course not.
I played with Mel Martin. I played with Vince. Vince always had nice concerts, nice gigs someplace. Mike Knock always had work. I played a lot with Swallow and Landy and Trio, and then we had a bigger band with Glenn Cronkite and Mel Martin. Uh,
Oh man, where are the
yeah, I
tapes of
mean,
that stuff, dude? I need to hear that
oh God,
immediately.
God knows, man.
Were you hip to that band that Knock and McClure were in called The Fourth Way with Eddie
Oh
Marsh?
yeah, yeah.
Because
That
they
was
played the
right.
New Orleans house. That band was pre-Weather Report.
Yeah, no, that was an amazing band. Yeah, that I mean, I met Mike kind of at the tail end of that. Eddie Marshall, I
Oh,
knew real well out there, and yeah, man, those were actually great times. And finally, my wife got sick of the West Coast, and she wanted to come back here and get a degree in movement therapy. And we did, against my better judgment. New York seemed so ominous at that point after living in California for almost 4 years. And so we came back here, and I started working again immediately. I got a steady gig at the Persian Room in the Plaza Hotel, playing with a very, very nice commercial jazz trio. You know, it was like, and then it would augment to a show band on the weekends. And I did that gig right up until the time that I auditioned for Bill. And playing trio every night with a good piano player, a good bass player, I think really, really prepared me for this audition with Bill, and also the 2 years with Giraldi, and you know, and the rest you know about. But yeah, I mean, there was work. You know, there was work. If you played, you could work. Unlike what's going on today. You know?
Would you choose the same path as a musician if you were 16 today?
I really don't know, because
I know it's a great answer, actually, because I'm just saying the projection, the need for security, the supply and demand issue.
Well, first, even before that,
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'd be attracted to the music today
That's
the way
right.
I was
Yeah.
back then.
No, that's right.
You know, I mean, there was just something about what was going on in jazz back then that was absolutely mesmerizing for me. And it, like I say, I hear the new stuff today, and I'm not sure. I mean, maybe if I was that age, I would be. But, you know, it doesn't appeal to me in an emotional way. It appeals to me more in an intellectual and a virtuosic way. But jazz from the 40s, 50s, 60s just got my insides churning, man. You know, I mean, and I don't get that reaction to the music I hear today. You know, I just don't, for better or worse. And like I said, if I was growing up and I was 16 today, maybe I would feel that passion. But it's got to be a little different than what I was going through, you know. So there was no question that I was going to be a musician. The only thing that seemed to matter to me at that point was how good a jazz musician I could become. That was the only way that seemed to give me an accurate appraisal of who I was and what I wanted to do. Everything else seemed secondary. I worked in the day world. Didn't mean anything to me. It was just stuff I was doing for money.
I get it.
Had I been able to latch on, maybe I would. There was a time in music when maybe I would have gone for a more commercial bent just to have a better living. But, you know, I guess the gig with Bill and the opportunity with Bill and all the stuff that came before in San Francisco and stuff just set me on a course that I was just too in love with it to leave it, you know. It was just too important to me. Even today, I can't think of anything that means anywhere near as much to me as what I do when I sit down at a drum set. You know.
As we wrap up set one here with Eliot Zigmund, I just, you know, when I listen to Shift in the Wind and I listen to Village Vanguard with Scotty and Paul, and like that Art Landy record you're on, every time I listen to those, I could listen to those albums, side A, side B, side A, side B, and you guys never play, or Bill in that Vanguard, you never played the same song the same way once. It was never a formula trip. And I think back to this sort of, I don't know, you talked about this sort of hyper addiction to this music and this sense of joy and the urgency. And every time I listen, even in studio sessions, to this stuff, like I said, you never play the same song the same way once. And I wanted you to talk about that, the aesthetics of being able to play conversational music like that, because in today's world, you're looking at a lot of formula, a lot of just play, just keep it safe. Nobody just don't take any chances. Just play through it. Don't stretch too far. I'm not even talking about in jazz, just in general. Play the song the same way you hear it on the radio. That's not what I want to hear. I want to hear people taking chances. I feel like that's the addiction to the music that I have. I didn't even grow up with it, but I wanted you to just talk about that philosophy of never playing the same song the same way once, because the guys you gravitated to and that you've recorded with were all like that.
It was the nature of jazz back then, you know. Or just, you know, the whole idea was to improvise and make it different, make it fresh. Try to always be reaching for something that's not quite there and not quite under your grasp, and and be dangerous.
So play beyond what you know?
Play beyond what you know, and don't even think about what you're playing. Just play. Like I said, it becomes conversational. Just let your mind and your body go where it's going to go. I mean, that's the great thing about jazz, is this open canvas. It's funny. I have this drummer friend, Jeff Brillinger, and he said, we grew up in this thing where we just have this canvas to work with. It's open. It's pretty much, there are some rules, but it's wide open.
Right.
And he said, drummers today, they're growing up and they have to have this groove thing. You know what I mean? They've got to be in this context. The context has lots more rules and lots more things that you must do and lots more sounds that you must make. And it's like what you say. It's formulaic and it's not as creative. And it's
actually predictable. It's predictable in some ways.
It's predictable, and also the drummer's role is not anywhere near as interesting as playing jazz.
See, you're because the drummer drives the band. The drummer is, and what you said before about it being that center, being underneath and lifting up, as opposed to being on top, just suffocating the noise, just suffocating the sound with just pulsating. Even Reggie Workman said to me he could go see a smoking set of jazz today, 45-minute set, and the drummer doesn't once touch the cymbals. They've lost that understanding of the colors of the. You listen to Styx Hooper with the Jazz Crusade. This stuff is on fire. It's just fire, man. And that's the thing. It's like the pacification. I just wonder if you guys ever even dawned on you that, like, over time, like, I was born in '78, and so all the music I gravitate to has this urgency and this inner burn and this, like, I don't give an F about, we're just going to play to the moon. And then everything was catering towards smooth jazz or pacification or, this sort of just like, we don't want to irritate anybody. We don't want to piss any of the audience off. The audience, when trained.
Yeah, that's the story of America at this point.
Right.
We don't relate to this country as, we're customers. We're not citizens.
Right.
You know what I mean?
You're darn
and
right,
everybody's going to try and make everything as good as they can for the customers, so the customer's happy and will keep paying. This is off topic, but I'm amazed when I hear these interviews with the Ukrainians, how they all speak of love of country, love of government, love of each other, and what they're willing to sacrifice. What more can you sacrifice than your life, man? And, listen to the average American. Have you ever heard an American in your life say that they have this love of their country and love of their fellow countrymen?
No.
We're customers here. We're at war with each other. It's like, it's insane, man. And certainly it reflects in the arts, It really does. It's unfortunate, but it does.
Before I let you go, can you just talk about, he's one of the most humble dudes, and I've actually not seen him in again, I hate labels here, but haven't seen him in an Eliot Zigmund sort of jazz setting. But Frank LaCrasto played with Pat Martino and Greg Osby, yourself. He's doing whatever he can to sing for his supper these days. I just wanted you to talk a little bit about why you chose him to join your group.
It actually wasn't me that chose him. It was his bass player we ended up playing with in Italy, Lorenzo. With Italian guys, but also occasionally we'd put American band together. And that was one of the instances where we put an American band together. And he had heard Frank on some recording somewhere, I forget what it was, and he really wanted to play with him. So, he asked me, would you contact Frank? I didn't know Frank at that point. Would you contact him and see if he was interested in coming? And that band was Frank, Lorenzo, the bass player, myself, and Chris Cheek. And I think that was the first time I had actually played a gig with Chris, although I had played some sessions with him. We went on to have sort of a musical relationship. So I, sad to say, since that time, which was quite a while ago now, I really haven't been in touch with Frank. His career seems to be more alternative kinds of music as opposed to things coming out of jazz. I'm not sure at this point.
Absolutely. No, he's doing,
where does he live at this point?
He's in Brooklyn. With his wife,
really?
Yep, absolutely. Got married and
kids?
No kids yet, but just a lot of stuff from, I guess, like the sort of the Les Baxter, sort of going to that sort of time of the mid '50s with soundtrack, and he's got his own little groove called Columbo. Very, very cool stuff. A lot of ambient sounds, but also just like working it into the context of making it a little bit more. I guess the word you've used quite a bit is commercial. Finding a way to sing for your supper. Because
Right.
let's face it. I mean, we know geniuses in this music or in jazz that have starved to death. And even your own story is. I mean, I can relate to it. It's just getting a lot of pressure to conform at the home front, and then you wind up doing things for your kids. In hindsight, I think you probably there was no right or wrong thing to leave Bill. I think that you did what you needed to do for your conscience, and thank God you're still here today. And I think, I mean, do you have talked to George Marsh a couple times, and he's 81 with a heart condition and still pretty much removed from society, in his pod, quote unquote.
George Marsh, the drummer?
George Marsh, dear friend, dear uncle, George Marsh, yes.
Yeah, I
and
haven't seen him. He's got a heart condition, really?
well, I mean, it's just what I'm saying is he hasn't gone out to play at all since COVID, and I
haven't either, man. I haven't
Yeah.
done a gig in almost 2 years now.
are you getting horny to play? I mean, do you want
Well, I
to?
play all the time in my house. I'm lucky to have a nice Steinway grand piano here, and cats come over constantly to play with me.
That's
So I'm
great.
playing sessions 2-3 times a week. I've got a couple of ongoing projects. I've also, one of the cats in one of the bands I'm playing with is this trumpet player, Rick Savage, great trumpet player, but he's also a recording engineer. So we've been documenting a lot of this stuff with the hope of getting it out eventually with 2 different groups. And I'm playing all the time, but not only the COVID, I'm immunosuppressed, so it makes it. I've got a standing invitation at Smalls, where I used to work a lot, to bring my band in whenever I want to come. But I'm afraid to go into these clubs because I hear cats go in, and 2 days later the whole band's sick.
I know.
I heard somebody was playing in the Birdland new room downstairs, and they got COVID. I mean, I can't afford it at my age with being immunosuppressed. I have no idea, what I'd be looking at in long COVID. And also about, I don't know, last October I had some serious surgery, which was almost life-threatening, or it was life-threatening. It was pretty amazing that I survived, and I've almost fully recovered, but that was a factor too. So I couldn't play, and now I'm looking at a target date of the fall, perhaps. I've got a couple of outdoor concerts in August, and then hopefully by the new year, maybe starting to return to some kind of touring. I mean, after work with all those, with Bill and Michelle and all the cats with big names, I started going back and forth to Europe 3-4 times a year for the better part of 30 years, doing that. And that all came to a screeching halt with COVID, and it hasn't really picked up. I mean, guys are starting to work now, but there's still that COVID scare. So it's
Well,
I don't know what the future is.
you're smart because just of your physical health, but there are, even if you were younger, cats can go on a big tour, but they may have to shut it down right away if somebody gets sick, and like there's
Exactly.
already,
Yeah.
so there is conundrums there, and it is starting to spike again, and it's very it took down my dearest brother here in Tucson, and he was much healthier than I mean, it's a very unpredictable thing, so I don't dare try to.
It is, and people are really underestimating it. I mean,
Way
nobody's
underestimating
in New York's. Nobody's wearing masks anymore. You walk into these clubs or restaurants, everybody's sitting there without a mask, and I'm like, are you guys crazy? Because it's surging here now.
It's surging. Well, and I mean, you know what? I'm vaccinated and boosted. I think people feel like it's just, I know that if I was, excuse me, at a different point in my life, I'd say just stay with the outdoor concerts. I'm glad this popped into my memory, my head. Did you play at Naropa ever with Art Landy?
No.
Okay.
No, that was a different.
Well, Grinelli was there. They were doing all this mixed. Like, did you do any like stuff? Not with art, but just with free improvisation with dancers. Did you ever mix entertainment musically, or have you always kind of been just a straight Sonic cat?
Yeah, I'm a straight Sonic. I haven't done much of that.
I dig.
I mean, the closest I got to that was with Art, because he always had his head in all kinds of weird stuff.
Oh, he's such a weird. I love how weird he is, dude.
I actually got to play with him a couple of years ago at Dean Johnson's house in Brooklyn, and
Oh man.
it was wonderful to play with him. He's become actually quite an authentic bopper, which he never was
He's
back then.
unbelievable. I love the evolution of you guys, man. Eliot, let's do set 2 down the road, man. I had such a ball with you, man.
Yeah, man, it was great talking to you, and yeah, I'd love to speak some more sometime.
Well, yeah, be safe, man, and we'll do it again soon.
You too.
All right,
Take
man.
care of yourself.
Later, man.
Be good.
Bye. Great way to end a relatively traumatic week here in the United States of America. Speaking to brilliant drummer and statesman Eliot Zigmund. That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll be back next week. Until then, I'm Power Talk. Peace.